Ashen Hollow had been abandoned for 12 years. Maps still showed its location. Road signs still pointed toward it. But nobody lived there anymore. The wildfire changed everything. Official reports said the fire started deep in the mountains. Strong winds pushed the flames toward town. Within hours, Ashen Hollow was consumed. Most residents escaped. Some did not. The government sealed the area. Investigators finished their reports. Insurance companies closed their cases. And eventually the world forgot. But Ashen Hollow never completely disappeared. Its name survived in rumors. Stories spread among hikers. Truck drivers claimed they heard strange radio signals near the old highway. Hunters reported seeing lights moving between burned trees. Nobody could prove any of it. Most people laughed and moved on. Daniel Mercer did not. Daniel was an investigative journalist. His career had once been successful. He had uncovered corruption scandals. He had exposed financial crimes. His articles appeared in major newspapers. But those days were gone. Now he spent most of his time chasing stories nobody else wanted. The strange package arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. There was no return address, no note, no explanation, only a small digital recorder. Daniel placed it on his desk. He pressed play. Static filled the room. For several seconds there was nothing else. Then a woman's voice appeared, weak, distorted, almost whispering. "Please, if anyone hears this." The recording crackled. Daniel leaned closer. The voice continued. They were wrong about the fire. More static interrupted the message. Then silence. A few seconds later, the woman spoke again. "They are still here." Daniel frowned. The message sounded old. Very old. The recording ended abruptly. At first it seemed like a prank, but something bothered him. The fear in her voice felt real. Daniel began researching immediately. The audio contained a timestamp buried in the signal. The date shocked him. The message had originated on the night Ashen Hollow burned, 12 years ago. That alone made no sense. But things became stranger. He ran the voice through archived interviews. Hours later, a match appeared. The speaker's name was Eleanor Graves, a schoolteacher, resident of Ashen Hollow, officially listed among the dead. Daniel stared at the screen. According to government records, Eleanor Graves died in the wildfire. Yet her voice was speaking on the recording. And she sounded very much alive. He searched for surviving relatives. None remained in the area. Former residents refused interviews. Several hung up the moment Ashen Hollow was mentioned. One elderly man answered only a single question: "Don't go there." Then he ended the call. That night, Daniel listened to the recording again and again. Each time he noticed something new, a faint sound beneath the static. At first, he thought it was interference. Then he realized it sounded like voices, multiple voices, speaking at once, whispering something impossible to understand. The whispers continued underneath Eleanor's message, as if others were standing nearby, listening, waiting. The next morning, Daniel made his decision. He packed cameras, audio equipment, maps, food supplies, everything needed for a long investigation. By afternoon, he was driving toward the mountains. Rain clouds gathered overhead. The farther he traveled, the emptier the roads became. Gas stations disappeared. Cell service weakened. The landscape grew darker. Near sunset, he reached the final highway marker. A rusted sign stood beside the road. Ashen Hollow population, 2,184. Someone had painted a black line across the population number. Daniel parked beside the sign. Silence surrounded him. No traffic, no animals, no wind, nothing. Then his radio suddenly crackled. Static exploded through the speakers. Daniel reached for the volume control. Before he touched it, a voice emerged. A woman's voice. Weak, distorted. The same voice from the recording. Eleanor Graves. And this time she said only 4 words. "Turn back while you can." Then the signal vanished. Daniel sat frozen behind the steering wheel. The radio had gone silent. Only a faint hiss remained. He stared at the dark road ahead. Logic told him there had to be an explanation. Someone could be using old equipment. Someone could be playing a cruel joke. But deep down he knew something was wrong. The voice sounded exactly like the recording. Every word, every pause, every trace of fear. The sun disappeared behind the mountains. Darkness spread across the valley. Daniel started the engine. The road carried him deeper into Ashen Hollow. Burned trees lined both sides of the highway. Their black trunks looked like skeletons reaching toward the sky. Miles passed without a single sign of life. Then the town appeared. Daniel slowed immediately. Ashen Hollow looked untouched, not restored, not rebuilt, simply abandoned. Storefronts stood exactly where they had been 12 years earlier. Cars remained parked along the streets. Streetlights leaned at odd angles. Broken windows reflected the fading light. Everything looked frozen, as if time had stopped. Daniel parked near the town square. The silence felt unnatural. Even ghost towns usually contain sounds. Wind, birds, animals. Ashen Hollow had none. He stepped from the vehicle. His footsteps echoed through the empty streets. The sound traveled farther than it should have. Daniel switched on his camera. The investigation had officially begun. He walked past an old diner. Menus still sat inside. Coffee cups remained on tables. Dust covered everything. But nothing appeared disturbed. The scene looked less like abandonment and more like interruption, as though people had simply stood up and left. A movement caught his attention. Daniel turned quickly. Nothing. The street behind him remained empty, yet he could have sworn someone had crossed the intersection. He scanned every direction. Still nothing. Eventually, he continued forward. The town hall stood near the center of town. Its front doors were unlocked. Inside, dust coated every surface. Stacks of paperwork remained scattered across desks. Daniel examined calendars hanging on the walls. Every one of them stopped on the same date, the night of the fire. He moved deeper into the building. A large clock hung above the main office. Its hands pointed to 2:17. Daniel noticed another clock nearby. It also displayed 2:17. A third clock showed the same time, then a fourth and a fifth. His stomach tightened. Every clock inside Town Hall had stopped at exactly 2:17 a.m. He left the building. Outside, curiosity became concern. Daniel entered several more locations: a pharmacy, a grocery store, a church. The result never changed. Something happened at that moment, something important. The question was what? As darkness settled over Ashen Hollow, Daniel searched for a place to stay. Near the edge of town, he found an old roadside motel. The building looked abandoned but structurally sound. One room remained accessible. Daniel carried his equipment inside. The room smelled of dust and smoke. He checked the windows. Locked. He checked the doors. Secure. Satisfied, he began reviewing footage from the day. Hours passed. Midnight approached. Outside, the town remained silent. Then a strange sound interrupted his work. Crunch. Daniel looked toward the door. Nothing followed. Several seconds passed. Then another crunch. Slow. Deliberate. As though someone were walking across gravel. Daniel grabbed a flashlight. The sound continued. Crunch. 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 Moving closer. He approached the window carefully. His heartbeat accelerated. The flashlight beam swept across the darkness. Nothing. No person. No animal. No movement. The sound stopped. Daniel waited. Still nothing. Eventually he opened the door. Cold air rushed inside. The motel parking lot stood empty beneath the moonlight. For a moment he felt foolish. Then he looked down. Fresh footprints crossed the ash-covered ground. Daniel followed them with his flashlight. Each print appeared perfectly clear. Human, barefoot, recently made. The trail led directly toward his room, then stopped outside the door. Not turned, not continued, stopped. As if someone had been standing there, watching. Daniel scanned the darkness again. No one appeared. He followed the footprints backward. They stretched across the parking lot, toward the road, toward the center of town. Then they vanished completely. The final footprint ended in the middle of the street. No next step, no explanation, just empty pavement. A sudden burst of static exploded from inside the motel room. Daniel jumped. The sound came from his radio equipment. He rushed back inside. The radio crackled violently. Static filled the speakers. Then voices emerged beneath the noise. Dozens of voices, whispering at once. Daniel adjusted the volume. The whispers grew clearer. He could almost understand them. Almost. Then one voice separated from the others. A woman's voice. Eleanor Graves. Soft, terrified, desperate. Do not go underground. The transmission ended instantly. Silence returned. Daniel stared at the radio. One question echoed through his mind. Why was everyone trying to keep him away from whatever lay beneath Ashen Hollow? Daniel barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the footprints. The trail that ended without explanation, the voices hidden inside the static, and Eleanor's warning, do not go underground. By sunrise, he was already reviewing everything he had collected. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Every clue pointed toward Eleanor Graves. If he wanted answers, he needed to understand her story. The town library sat near the old school. Like everything else in Ashen Hollow, it had been abandoned. Dust covered the shelves. Books remained exactly where they had been left. Daniel searched through local archives. Hours passed. Then he found her. Eleanor Graves, 34 years old, teacher, resident of Ashen Hollow for nearly a decade, respected by students, loved by parents. Nothing unusual, at least at first. But deeper inside the records, Daniel discovered something strange. 3 months before the fire, Eleanor had stopped teaching. Official documents listed it as medical leave. Yet no medical records existed. No hospital visits. No diagnosis. Nothing. Instead, Daniel found newspaper clippings. Several described Eleanor attending town council meetings. Others mentioned public arguments. One article caught his attention immediately. The headline read, "Local teacher demands investigation of old mines." Daniel leaned closer. The article was short. According to the report, Eleanor claimed unusual activity had been occurring beneath Ashen Hollow. The council dismissed her concerns. Most residents assumed she was mistaken. Some believed stress had affected her judgment. Others thought she wanted attention. No formal investigation occurred. Daniel continued searching. Near the back of a filing cabinet, he found a cardboard storage box. Inside were dozens of photographs. Many showed normal town events, school functions, parades, community gatherings. Then the photographs changed. Eleanor appeared in nearly every image, not smiling, not celebrating, investigating. She stood near abandoned mine entrances, survey markers, restricted areas. One photograph showed her speaking with a group of miners. Their expressions looked nervous. Another image showed Eleanor holding several pages of handwritten notes. Behind her stood a warning sign, "No entry, unstable tunnels." Daniel flipped through the remaining photographs. The final image made him stop. It had been taken at night. Eleanor stood near a fenced mining shaft. The photograph was blurry, dark, poorly exposed, yet something appeared behind her. A shape, tall, human-like, standing inside the darkness of the shaft, watching. Daniel stared for several seconds. The figure seemed wrong somehow. Its proportions looked unnatural. Its arms appeared too long. Its posture looked twisted. The more he examined the image, the more uncomfortable he became. A sudden noise echoed from upstairs. Daniel looked up. The library fell silent. He waited. Nothing followed. Probably the building settling. At least that was what he told himself. He returned to the photographs. Beneath them, he discovered a small notebook. The cover contained a single name, Eleanor Graves. Daniel carefully opened it. A diary. Most pages described ordinary life, teaching, friends, town events. Then the entries changed. The handwriting became rushed, uneven, fearful. One entry immediately stood out. "Something is wrong beneath Ashen Hollow." Daniel turned the page. "The sounds are getting louder." Another page. "They hear them too. The miners won't admit it publicly." Another. "They say the voices come from deep below." Daniel continued reading. Each entry became darker. Residents reported strange dreams. People claimed they heard whispering beneath their homes. Several miners quit without explanation. One disappeared entirely. Then Daniel reached the final written page. The entry was dated 3 days before the fire. The handwriting shook violently. "I finally found the chamber," Daniel read faster. "They were hiding it. I saw the carvings. They are older than the town. I don't think the voices are human." The entry stopped abruptly. The next page had been torn out. Daniel checked again. The missing page had been removed intentionally. It was gone. Whatever Eleanor wrote next had disappeared. And judging by her previous entries, it may have contained the most important information of all. Daniel slipped the diary into his bag. Someone had gone through great effort to remove that page, which meant it mattered. Outside, clouds gathered over the mountains. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Daniel decided to visit the school where Eleanor once worked. The building stood only a few blocks away. Inside, classrooms remained untouched. Books still sat on desks. Assignments remained pinned to walls. Time had preserved everything. Near Eleanor's old classroom, Daniel found a locked office. The door resisted several attempts. Finally, it opened. Dust swirled through the air. Inside stood a filing cabinet. Most drawers contained student records. One drawer contained something else. Audio tapes. Dozens of them. Each labeled in Eleanor's handwriting. Interview 1. Interview 2. Witness statement. Tunnel recording. Daniel's pulse quickened. He selected one at random. A portable player still sat nearby. Surprisingly, it worked. The tape began. Static filled the speaker. Then a man's voice appeared. Nervous, shaking. "I heard them again." Eleanor's voice answered. "Where?" "Below shaft 7. "What did they say?" A long silence followed. The man finally replied. "They knew my name." Daniel felt a chill move through his body. The recording continued. "I never told anyone I was there. They shouldn't know who I am." The tape ended. Daniel reached for another. Before he could press play, a loud crash echoed somewhere inside the school. This time, the sound was unmistakable. Something had fallen, or someone had moved. Daniel stood slowly. The hallway outside remained empty, but a new sound followed. Footsteps. Slow, dragging. Moving somewhere beyond the classroom doors. Daniel grabbed his flashlight. The footsteps stopped immediately. Silence returned. Then, from the far end of the hallway, a faint whisper drifted through the darkness. One sentence, barely audible, yet impossible to mistake. "She's still down there." Daniel remained frozen beside the classroom door. The whisper echoed inside his mind. "She's still down there." The hallway ahead stood empty. His flashlight beam swept across rows of lockers. Nothing moved. Nothing appeared. Yet he knew he had heard it. The voice sounded real. Too real. Slowly, he stepped into the corridor. Dust covered the floor. No fresh footprints. No signs of intrusion. Only silence. The school seemed abandoned once again. Daniel searched every classroom, every office, every storage room. Nobody was there. Eventually, he returned to Eleanor's recordings. If someone wanted him to hear that message, then it probably wasn't random. He gathered the tapes and left the school. Dark clouds now covered most of the sky. The air felt heavy, unnatural. Back at the motel, Daniel spent hours listening to Eleanor's interviews. Again and again, the same details appeared. Voices underground, strange sounds, disappearing workers, fear. One interview stood out more than the others. The speaker was identified only as Harold M., a former miner. His voice trembled throughout the recording. "Eleanor, you have to stop asking questions." "Why?" she asked. "Because some things should stay buried." "What did you see?" A long silence followed. Then Harold answered. "I saw someone walk into the tunnel." Eleanor waited. "So?" Harold's breathing became shaky. "He died 3 years earlier." The tape ended abruptly. Daniel leaned back. The pattern was becoming clearer. The mines were at the center of everything. Not the wildfire, not the abandoned town. The mines. The next morning, Daniel drove to the nearest occupied community. Most former residents of Ashen Hollow had relocated there after the disaster. Finding people willing to talk proved difficult. Many refused immediately. Some closed their doors. Others pretended not to hear his questions. The name Ashen Hollow still frightened them. Hours later, he finally found someone willing to speak. An elderly woman named Martha Briggs. She had lived in Ashen Hollow for nearly 60 years. Her hands shook as she poured tea. When Daniel mentioned Eleanor, Martha looked away. "I knew her. What happened before the fire?" Daniel asked. Martha remained silent for several seconds. Then she sighed. "Eleanor wasn't crazy." Daniel leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "People said she imagined things." Martha shook her head. "She didn't." The room suddenly felt colder. Daniel listened carefully. Martha stared toward the window. "The voices started years before the fire." "Voices?" She nodded. "At first, only the miners heard them." "What did they say?" "Different things." Her voice lowered. "But they always knew personal details." Daniel remembered the tape. The miner, whose name had somehow been known. Martha continued. Then people began disappearing. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. "How many?" "Officially, 3. And unofficially," Martha hesitated. "More." Thunder rumbled outside. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Daniel waited. Martha finally spoke again. "The town council covered it up." "Why?" "They were afraid." "Of what?" This time her answer came immediately. What was beneath the mines? A chill crawled across Daniel's skin. What exactly was down there? Martha looked directly into his eyes. For the first time, her expression showed genuine fear. I don't know. The answer surprised him, she continued. But I know what happened to the people who went looking. Silence filled the room. Daniel swallowed. What happened? They came back different. The words lingered heavily. Different how? Martha's hands tightened around the cup. They looked the same. They sounded the same. But something wasn't right. Daniel remembered the figure standing behind Eleanor in the photograph. The unnatural posture. The strange proportions. Martha continued speaking. My husband worked in the mines. Daniel stayed quiet. He heard things. Voices? She nodded. One night he followed them. Her eyes filled with sadness. He found something. What? Martha looked away. He never told me. The silence returned. Then she whispered something almost too quietly to hear. 3 weeks later, he disappeared. Daniel left Martha's house with more questions than answers. Yet one fact seemed certain. The wildfire was not the beginning. It was the end of something that had started much earlier. As evening approached, Daniel returned to Ashen Hollow. Rain clouds covered the mountains. The abandoned town looked darker than before, almost hostile. He parked near the northern edge of town. According to old maps, several mining entrances existed nearby. Most had been sealed after the disaster. Daniel began searching. The first tunnel had collapsed. The second had been buried intentionally. The third appeared completely inaccessible. Then he found the fourth. A rusted security gate blocked the entrance. Heavy chains wrapped around the bars. Government warning signs covered the metal. Restricted area. Do not enter. Structural hazard. The warnings looked old. Very old. Daniel examined the chains. Someone had cut them years earlier. The gate hung slightly open, just enough to squeeze through. A cold draft flowed from inside. The air smelled strange. Not like earth. Not like stone. Something older. Something stale. Daniel switched on his flashlight. The tunnel descended into darkness. Far below, the beam vanished completely. For several seconds, he stood motionless. Eleanor's warning echoed in his mind. Do not go underground. Every clue pointed here. Every recording. Every witness. Every missing person. The answers waited below. Finally, Daniel stepped through the gate. The temperature dropped instantly. Darkness swallowed the entrance behind him. The tunnel stretched endlessly ahead. Silent, empty. Watching. Then a sound emerged from somewhere deep underground. A whisper. Faint. Distant. Impossible to understand. But definitely human. And it was moving closer. The whisper continued. Faint. Distant. Yet growing steadily louder. Daniel stood motionless inside the tunnel. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness ahead. Nothing appeared. No movement. No figure. Only the endless passage disappearing into blackness. The whisper suddenly stopped. Silence returned. Daniel exhaled slowly. Every instinct told him to leave. Instead, he moved deeper underground. The tunnel sloped downward at a gradual angle. Old support beams lined the walls. Many had cracked with age. Others looked close to collapse. Dust covered everything. At first. Then Daniel noticed something strange. Several sections of the floor were clean, recently disturbed, as though something had passed through, not years ago, recently. The realization made him grip the flashlight tighter. Minutes later, he discovered old mining equipment. Rust-covered carts sat abandoned beside the tracks. Broken helmets lay scattered across the ground. Most appeared untouched since the fire. Then he found something unexpected. A lantern. Modern. Not ancient, not 12 years old. Daniel examined it carefully. The battery compartment was empty, but the plastic remained intact. Someone had been down here long after the town was abandoned. He continued deeper. The tunnel eventually widened. New markings appeared on the walls. At first they looked like scratches. Then Daniel realized they were symbols. Hundreds of them, carved directly into the stone. Some resembled circles. Others resembled human figures. Several appeared completely unfamiliar. The carvings stretched for nearly 50 feet. Daniel photographed everything. Many symbols overlapped older carvings beneath them, as though generations of people had returned to add more. One image appeared repeatedly, a dark opening beneath a mountain, human figures standing around it, and something emerging from below, something larger than all the others. Daniel stared at the image. A cold sensation settled in his stomach. The figure looked disturbingly similar to the shape in Eleanor's photograph. The same unnatural proportions. The same elongated arms. The same twisted posture. A sudden metallic sound echoed through the tunnel. Clang. Daniel spun around. Nothing. The darkness behind him remained empty. Yet the sound had been close. Very close. He waited. Several seconds passed. Then silence returned. Slowly, he continued forward. The tunnel split into multiple directions. Old signs identified different shafts. Most had collapsed. One remained open. Shaft 7. Daniel immediately remembered the tape recording. The miner who heard voices had mentioned Shaft 7. Without hesitation, he followed the passage. The air grew colder. His breath became visible. The walls narrowed. The darkness seemed heavier, almost alive. Then his flashlight illuminated a steel door. Massive, industrial, unlike anything else in the mine. Government markings covered its surface. Several warning labels remained visible. Sealed by federal order. Do not open. Daniel examined the hinges. The door stood slightly open. Only a few inches. Someone had forced it years ago. Beyond the gap lay darkness. Absolute darkness. He pushed carefully. The hinges groaned. The door swung inward. A large chamber appeared beyond. Daniel stepped inside. His flashlight revealed rows of storage shelves. Boxes. Crates. Metal containers. Many had collapsed with age. This was not part of the original mine. Someone had built this place. Secretly. He opened the nearest container. Inside lay personal belongings. Wallets, photographs, jewelry, clothing, dozens of items, all carefully cataloged. Daniel moved to another shelf. More belongings. Another shelf. Even more. His pulse accelerated. These were not random objects. They belonged to people. A nearby clipboard rested on a desk. Daniel picked it up. Names filled the pages. Hundreds of names. Beside many entries appeared one word. Missing. Daniel stared in disbelief. Official reports listed only a handful of disappearances. This document suggested something entirely different. The missing numbered far higher than anyone had admitted. A chill spread through the room. Someone had hidden this, intentionally, for decades. Then Daniel noticed a photograph pinned to the wall. His heart nearly stopped. Eleanor Graves. The picture had been taken only days before the fire. She stood inside this very chamber. Behind her was a map. Daniel moved closer. The map showed the mine system. Most tunnels appeared ordinary. One section had been circled repeatedly in red ink. At the bottom, someone had written two words, hollow below. Daniel remembered Martha's warning. He remembered the recordings. The phrase appeared again and again. The hollow below. Whatever it was, everyone feared it. A sudden burst of static erupted nearby. Daniel nearly dropped the flashlight. The sound came from an old radio sitting on a desk. Impossible. The equipment should not have been functioning. Yet the radio crackled loudly. Static filled the chamber. Then a voice emerged. Eleanor. Weak. Distorted. Desperate. If you're hearing this, the signal cut briefly, then returned. Do not trust what you see. Daniel stepped closer. The message continued. They look like us now. A loud burst of interference interrupted the transmission. For several seconds, the radio screamed with static. Then Eleanor returned. You have to find the chamber. Another interruption. Then her final words. They're already above. The transmission ended abruptly. Silence crashed back into the room. Daniel stared at the radio. His mind raced. They're already above. Above what? Above the chamber? Above the mines? Or above ground? A faint sound echoed from somewhere beyond the storage room. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Approaching. Daniel switched off the radio. The footsteps continued. 1, 2, 3. Getting closer. He aimed the flashlight toward the doorway. Nothing appeared. Yet the sound persisted. Then a figure stepped into the edge of the beam. Daniel froze. The person wore old mining clothes. Their face remained hidden in shadow. For a brief moment, Daniel felt relief. Another survivor. Someone who could explain everything. Then the figure raised its head, and Daniel's relief vanished. The face looked human. Almost. But the eyes were wrong. Completely black, and the smile stretched far wider than any human smile should. Daniel stumbled backward. The flashlight shook violently in his hand. The figure remained standing in the doorway, motionless, watching. Its black eyes reflected the beam. That impossible smile never moved. For several seconds, neither of them did anything. Then the figure tilted its head. A sharp cracking sound echoed through the chamber. The movement looked wrong, as if the neck bent farther than it should. Daniel's survival instincts took over. He turned and ran. His footsteps thundered through the storage room. Behind him came another sound. Running. Fast. Far too fast. Daniel raced toward the steel door. The footsteps closed the distance immediately. Closer, closer. Then they stopped. Instantly. The silence was almost worse. Daniel reached the corridor and spun around. Nothing. The doorway stood empty. The figure was gone. His breathing echoed through the tunnel. The darkness beyond remained still. Eventually, he forced himself to continue moving. The encounter had changed everything. Whatever was happening beneath Ashen Hollow was real. Terrifyingly real. And Eleanor had known about it. Hours later, Daniel returned to the motel. Exhaustion hit him immediately. But sleep remained impossible. Instead, he began examining everything collected from the mine. Photographs, documents, maps, recordings. One item stood out, a locked metal case he had found inside the storage chamber. At first, he assumed it was empty. Then he noticed a damaged latch. After several attempts, the lock finally broke. Inside were dozens of official reports, government reports. Many carried classification markings. Daniel opened the first file. His eyes widened. The document described unusual events occurring beneath Ashen Hollow nearly 40 years before the fire. Residents reported hearing voices underground. Workers disappeared. Exploration teams vanished. Entire sections of tunnels were sealed. The next report was even stranger. A team of geologists had discovered an enormous cavern beneath the mine system. Its size exceeded every existing map. According to the report, ancient carvings covered the walls. The carvings predated the town, possibly by centuries. Daniel continued reading. Each report became more disturbing. Several investigators described hearing familiar voices while underground, voices belonging to deceased relatives, friends, children. Some followed the voices, most never returned. Others came back changed. The reports repeatedly used the same phrase, behavioral irregularities. No further explanation was provided. Daniel already knew what that meant. Martha had described the same thing, people returning different, not entirely themselves. Then he found the most important document, a report dated one day before the fire, the final report ever written in Ashen Hollow. Daniel read carefully. The pages described emergency meetings, evacuations, growing panic. Town officials believed something beneath the mine system had become active. Whatever containment measures existed were failing. Then Daniel reached the final page. The conclusion consisted of only one sentence: initiate burn protocol. Daniel stared at the words. His heartbeat quickened. Burn protocol. The wildfire had not been accidental. It had been intentional. Someone started it. Someone wanted the town destroyed. The realization changed everything. The fire wasn't the disaster, it was the solution. At least temporarily. Thunder rattled the motel windows. Rain poured outside. Daniel continued searching the case. Near the bottom, he found a folded sheet of paper. The missing diary page. Eleanor's missing diary page. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. The handwriting matched perfectly. The date was one day before the fire. Daniel began reading. I finally reached the lowest chamber. I understand now. The voices are not coming from below. He frowned. The next sentence chilled him. They are trying to come up. Rain hammered against the glass. Daniel continued. They copy people. At first, they only imitate voices. Then, faces. Then entire identities. A knot formed in his stomach. The smiling figure. The black eyes. The distorted face. Eleanor had seen them. Years earlier. He read faster. The miners called them echoes. They wear human shapes. But they are not human. Another line followed. One that nearly made him stop breathing. They have already replaced some of the townspeople. Daniel lowered the page. For several seconds, he simply stared. Replaced. Not killed. Not possessed. Replaced. The implications were horrifying. The final section of the diary became increasingly frantic. They are spreading. The council knows. The government knows. The fire is the only option left. Daniel reached the final sentence. The last words Eleanor ever wrote. If this fails, seal the hollow below forever. The page ended there. Silence filled the room. Everything finally made sense. The cover-up, the disappearances, the fire, the sealed tunnels, the government reports. They had all been trying to contain something. Something capable of becoming human, or at least pretending to be. A loud knock shattered the silence. Daniel nearly jumped. 3 slow knocks. From the motel door, his pulse accelerated. Nobody should be here. The town was abandoned. The knock came again. 3 more times. Slow. Patient. Daniel approached quietly. No voice followed. No explanation. Only silence. He looked through the peephole. At first he saw nothing. Then a face moved into view. A woman. Her features appeared familiar. Very familiar. Daniel's blood ran cold. It was Eleanor Graves. Exactly as she appeared in old photographs. Not older. Not injured. Not dead. Standing outside the room. Looking directly into the peephole. Smiling. Then her mouth moved. No sound passed through the door. Yet Daniel understood every word. Run. Daniel stepped away from the door immediately. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it. Eleanor Graves was dead. Every official record confirmed it. Every report. Every photograph. Every witness. Yet she was standing outside his motel room, looking directly at him, smiling. Daniel forced himself to look through the peephole again. The hallway was empty. No woman. No footsteps. No sign that anyone had ever been there. The corridor stretched silently in both directions. Daniel opened the door. Cold air drifted inside. Nothing waited outside. Then he noticed something on the floor. A folded piece of paper. Fresh. Clean. Impossible. He picked it up carefully. 3 words were written across the front. They found you. Daniel looked around once more. The motel remained empty. The town remained silent. Yet the message felt real. Terrifyingly real. He locked the door and returned inside. Sleep was no longer an option. Before dawn, he reviewed Eleanor's diary again. One sentence kept returning to his mind. They have already replaced some of the townspeople. If that was true, then the fire might never have solved the problem. Some of them could have escaped. The thought refused to leave him. As morning arrived, Daniel returned to the mine. Fog drifted through Ashen Hollow. Thick gray ash mixed with the mist. Visibility dropped with every passing minute. The town felt different now. More hostile, more aware. Almost as if something knew he was getting closer. The entrance to the mine waited exactly where he had left it. The rusted gate swayed slightly in the wind. Daniel stepped through. Darkness swallowed him once again. Hours passed as he explored deeper sections of the tunnel system. Many passages had collapsed. Others ended in dead ends. Then he found something unexpected. A narrow corridor hidden behind a cave-in. Someone had cleared a path through the rubble years earlier. The passage descended steeply, far deeper than the original mine. Daniel followed it. The temperature dropped steadily. The walls changed. Natural stone replaced mining supports. This section had never been excavated by miners. It had existed long before the town, long before the mine. The corridor eventually opened into a massive cavern. Daniel stopped immediately. The space was enormous. His flashlight barely illuminated the nearest walls. Ancient carvings covered every surface. Thousands of them, perhaps millions. The images stretched into darkness. Most depicted human figures. Others showed strange shapes emerging from underground. One scene appeared repeatedly. People gathered around large fires. Mountains burning. Entire settlements engulfed in flames. Daniel photographed everything. Then he noticed the dates. Not written in modern language. Carved. Repeated. Separated by centuries. Every few hundred years, the same event appeared again. The same creatures. The same fires. The same destruction. Ashen Hollow was not the first. It was merely the latest. A sudden burst of static echoed through the cavern. Daniel froze. The sound came from his radio. The device activated by itself. Static filled the chamber. Then voices emerged. Dozens, hundreds, thousands. Whispering simultaneously. The sound made his skin crawl. Slowly, individual words became clear. Not random words. Names. Human names. Different names. Endless names. The voices seemed to be reciting them, memorizing them, learning them. Then one voice separated from the rest. Eleanor. Do not answer them. Daniel remained silent. The whispering intensified. More voices joined. Some sounded familiar, others sounded impossible. Children, adults, elderly people, all speaking at once. Then one voice made Daniel's blood run cold. His mother's voice. She had died years ago, yet he heard her clearly, calling his name, asking for help, begging him to come closer. Daniel backed away immediately. The voices became louder, desperate, insistent. His mother's voice continued. Then his father's voice joined. Then old friends, people from every stage of his life, all calling him, all pleading with him. Daniel covered his ears. The sound continued anyway. The voices weren't coming through the radio anymore. They were coming from the cavern itself, from every direction, from the stone, from the darkness. Then they stopped. Instantly. The silence felt crushing. Daniel lowered his hands slowly. Movement caught his eye. Across the cavern, at the very edge of the flashlight beam. Figures, human-shaped figures, standing motionless, watching. There were dozens. No, hundreds. Shadow-like silhouettes filling the darkness. Daniel aimed the flashlight directly at them. Most vanished immediately, but a few remained, tall, still, unnaturally thin. One stepped forward, then another. Their movements looked wrong, like actors attempting to imitate human behavior. Daniel took a step backward. The figures stopped. One raised an arm, slowly, then pointed deeper into the cavern, toward a passage hidden beyond the carvings. A passage Daniel had not noticed before. The shadow lowered its arm. None of the figures moved again. They simply watched, waiting. Daniel looked toward the hidden passage. Above the entrance, ancient symbols had been carved deeply into the stone. Beneath them appeared words written in faded paint, words much newer than the carvings, likely written by Eleanor herself. The hollow below. A cold realization settled over him. This was it, the place everyone feared, the place the miners whispered about, the place the government tried to bury, the place Eleanor died trying to reach, or perhaps survived trying to escape. Daniel stepped toward the passage. The shadows did not follow. They only watched, as if they knew what waited ahead, and as if they were afraid of it too. Daniel stood before the entrance to the hollow below. The passage beyond looked different from every tunnel he had seen so far. The stone was darker, smoother, almost polished, as though countless hands had touched it over centuries. The air flowing from inside felt strangely warm. Not hot, not cold, just wrong, like the breath of something sleeping. Daniel checked his equipment one final time. Battery levels were dropping. His radio hissed quietly with static. The flashlight remained stable. That was enough. He stepped forward. The passage narrowed immediately. The walls pressed closer. The ceiling lowered. For nearly 20 minutes, he walked in complete silence. No voices, no whispers, nothing. The absence of sound felt unnatural. Then, the tunnel ended. Daniel froze. The space beyond was enormous, far larger than the cavern above. His flashlight could not reach the opposite side. Massive stone pillars rose into darkness. Ancient carvings covered every surface. Unlike the carvings above, these were detailed, painfully detailed. Entire histories had been recorded here. Daniel moved closer. The first section depicted people discovering a deep opening beneath a mountain. The second showed strange figures emerging from it. The third showed entire villages burning. Generation after generation repeated the same cycle. Discovery, imitation, fire, containment, over and over, across centuries, across civilizations. One carving appeared newer than the others, much newer. Ashen Hollow. The town itself had been added to the wall. Daniel stared at it. Someone had documented the modern disaster exactly like the ancient ones. Then he noticed something beside the carving. Names. Hundreds of names. Residents of Ashen Hollow. Many were crossed out. Others remained untouched. A realization hit him. The crossed-out names belonged to confirmed victims. The untouched names belonged to the missing. Not dead, missing. His pulse quickened. The disappearances were connected to this place. Everything was connected to this place. A sudden click echoed nearby. Daniel spun around. His flashlight illuminated a metal structure built against the cavern wall. It looked completely out of place. Modern, industrial, government equipment, generators, communication systems, monitoring stations. Most had stopped working years ago. One had not. A single radio console remained active. Its indicator light blinked softly. Daniel approached slowly. The machine crackled with static. Then a familiar voice emerged. Eleanor Graves. Clearer than ever before. If you're hearing this, then you reached the chamber. Daniel stared at the speaker. The recording continued. My name is Eleanor Graves. I was never supposed to survive. The words echoed through the cavern. Daniel listened carefully. The fire failed. A knot formed in his stomach. The containment failed. The radio hissed briefly. Then Eleanor continued. They escaped before the burn. Daniel's breathing slowed. Every fear he had carried suddenly became real. The fire had not stopped them, it had only delayed them. The message continued. They learned faster than expected. They learned how to copy everything. Faces, voices, memories. Daniel remembered Martha's warning. People returning different, not entirely themselves. Eleanor's voice grew quieter. I remained behind because someone had to stay. The radio crackled. I closed the lower gate. I trapped the source. Daniel stepped closer. The source. The word mattered. The source was still here, somewhere in this chamber. Then Eleanor spoke the sentence he had been waiting for. The hollow below is not a place. Daniel froze. The recording continued. It is a living thing. Silence followed. Several seconds passed before the message resumed. It sleeps beneath the mountain. The echoes are only extensions of it. Daniel's stomach tightened. Everything he had seen, the voices, the figures, the imitations, they were not separate creatures. They belonged to something larger, something ancient, something hidden beneath the earth. The radio crackled violently. Then Eleanor's final message began. I can hear it waking up. I don't know how much time remains. If someone reaches this chamber, the signal weakened. Destroy the lower gate. Daniel frowned. Destroy it? Why? Then the answer came. Do not let it open from the inside. The transmission ended. Silence returned. Daniel stood motionless. Then he heard it. A deep sound. Far below the cavern. A slow vibration. Like distant thunder. Except it wasn't coming from above. It was coming from beneath him. The floor trembled slightly. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The vibration came again. Stronger. Daniel aimed his flashlight toward the far end of the chamber. A massive steel barrier stood there. Nearly 50 feet tall, covered with warning symbols, heavy chains, reinforced supports, emergency locks. This was the lower gate, the barrier Eleanor had mentioned, the thing holding something back. Another tremor shook the cavern. This time several supports groaned loudly. Metal screamed somewhere in the darkness. Daniel's heartbeat accelerated. The gate was failing. Then movement appeared beneath it. At first he thought it was shadow. Then he realized the darkness was moving. Something shifted behind the narrow gap beneath the barrier. Something enormous, far too large to fit through. Yet still trying, a low sound echoed from beyond the gate. Not a roar, not a growl, a voice. Thousands of voices speaking together. Every voice Daniel had ever heard. Friends, family, children, strangers. All blended into one impossible sound. Then the voices formed a single sentence. We remember you. The steel gate shuddered violently. One of the chains snapped. The sound echoed throughout the entire cavern. For the first time, Daniel understood the true scale of the danger. The echoes were never the real threat. They were only the warning. Something much older was waiting behind that gate, and it was beginning to wake up. The broken chains swung slowly from the gate. Metal scraped against metal. The sound echoed throughout the chamber. Daniel could not look away. The gap beneath the barrier remained small, only a few inches. Yet the darkness behind it seemed endless, alive, watching, waiting. Another tremor shook the cavern. More dust fell from above. The steel supports groaned loudly. The gate would not hold forever. Daniel forced himself to move. Eleanor's recordings had mentioned another control station, a backup system. If he could find it, perhaps he could stop whatever was happening. He searched the government equipment lining the chamber wall. Most terminals were dead, their screens shattered or dark. Then one monitor flickered to life. Static filled the display. Slowly, text appeared. Containment status, critical failure. Daniel stared at the screen. Several additional files remained accessible. He opened the first one. A video recording appeared. The date stunned him. It had been recorded on the night of the fire. The image showed a group of officials gathered inside this very chamber. Military personnel, scientists, town leaders, and Eleanor Graves. She stood near the center of the room, exhausted, covered in ash. The recording played. "We are out of options," one official said. "The evacuation is complete." Another shook his head. "Not complete." The camera shifted toward Eleanor. She looked directly at the speaker. "There are still people underground." The room fell silent. Then someone asked the question Daniel had been wondering for days: how many of them are still human? Nobody answered. The silence itself became the answer. The recording continued. An elderly scientist stepped forward. His face looked pale, terrified. "The hollow has adapted." Daniel listened carefully. "The echoes are no longer simple copies." The scientist pointed toward the lower gate. "They remember the people they imitate." A chill moved through Daniel's body. The scientist continued. "They inherit memories. They inherit emotions. They inherit identities." The implication was horrifying. The copies believed they were real, or at least some of them did. Then Eleanor spoke. "We can still stop this." The scientist shook his head. "No." He looked toward the gate. "The source has already awakened." Daniel paused the recording. Source. The word appeared again. The living thing beneath the mountain. The thing creating the echoes. He resumed the video. The discussion grew increasingly desperate. Arguments filled the chamber. Some demanded evacuation. Others demanded destruction. Then Eleanor revealed something unexpected. "I went through the gate." The room fell silent. Even the officials looked shocked. Daniel leaned closer. Eleanor continued. "I saw it." Nobody spoke. The scientist finally asked, "What did you see?" Eleanor hesitated. Then she answered, "It wasn't what we thought." Daniel's pulse quickened. The recording continued. "The hollow isn't trying to destroy us." Confused voices erupted around the room. Eleanor raised her hand. "It doesn't understand us." The chamber became quiet again. She continued. "It learns by copying. It imitates life. It imitates people. It imitates entire communities." Daniel stared at the screen. The idea sounded impossible, yet it explained everything. The echoes weren't invading. They were learning, trying to become human, failing, repeating the process endlessly. Then Eleanor said something even stranger. "It doesn't know the difference between imitation and reality." The scientist lowered his head, as though he already knew. The recording moved forward several minutes. The final decision had been made. The fire would begin. The town would burn. The tunnels would collapse. The lower gate would be sealed. Containment at any cost. Then Eleanor stepped away from the group. The camera followed her. She approached the gate alone. One official shouted after her, "Eleanor, where are you going?" She stopped, turned, and answered, "To stay." The video ended. Daniel sat in stunned silence. Eleanor had chosen to remain behind, not because she was trapped, not because she failed to escape, because she believed someone had to watch the gate. Someone had to monitor the source. Someone had to prevent another disaster. A faint sound echoed from behind him. Daniel turned immediately. Nothing. Then the sound came again. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Approaching through the darkness. Daniel raised the flashlight. Several figures emerged from the shadows. Human figures. Dozens of them. Men, women, children. All standing silently. Watching him. Their faces looked normal. Almost completely normal. Then Daniel noticed their eyes. Black. Every one of them. The echoes. None moved. None attacked. They simply watched. One stepped forward. A young woman. Her appearance matched old photographs Daniel had seen earlier. A missing resident. Officially dead, yet standing before him now. The woman spoke softly. "We don't want this." Daniel froze. The voice sounded human. Genuinely human. The woman continued. "We remember everything." Another echo stepped forward. An elderly man. "We remember our families." A third followed. A child. "We remember being afraid." Daniel stared in disbelief. The echoes were speaking, not mimicking. Speaking. Then the young woman looked toward the lower gate. Fear appeared across her face. Real fear. The source is changing. The cavern trembled again. A louder crack echoed through the darkness. Several chains snapped simultaneously. The steel barrier shifted slightly. The young woman's expression darkened. "If it wakes completely..." She stopped. Daniel finished the sentence himself. "Everyone dies." The woman nodded slowly. For the first time, Daniel realized the terrible truth. The echoes feared the source as much as humans did. Maybe more. Another violent tremor shook the chamber. The gate lurched forward. Metal screamed. The supports began collapsing. Dust filled the air. The final barrier was failing, and somewhere beyond it, something ancient was pushing back. The lower gate buckled. A deafening crack thundered through the chamber. Steel supports twisted violently. Dust exploded into the air. Daniel stumbled backward. The echoes retreated toward the edges of the cavern. Fear spread across every face. Not imitation, not performance, fear, real fear. The mountain trembled again. This time the floor split open beneath several support pillars. Chunks of stone crashed into the darkness below. The gate groaned, then moved. Only inches, but enough. A wave of cold air surged through the gap. Daniel felt it immediately. The air carried something with it. Whispers. Thousands of whispers, not coming through the radio, not coming from the cavern, coming directly from his mind. Memories flashed before his eyes, childhood moments, old conversations, faces he had not seen in decades. Every memory appeared at once. The hollow was searching him, learning him, copying him. Daniel fell to one knee. Pain shot through his head. The whispers grew louder. Then one voice emerged from the chaos. Eleanor. Clear, strong, close. Daniel. He looked around. No one stood nearby, yet the voice continued. The control station. Daniel's eyes shifted toward the abandoned equipment. A final emergency console sat near the wall, half buried beneath rubble. A red warning light blinked weakly. Eleanor's voice returned. You only have one chance. Daniel forced himself upright. The hollow pressed harder against his thoughts. Images flooded his mind. Promises, lies, memories, dreams. Every possible weakness. It was trying to understand him, trying to become him. He staggered toward the console. The cavern shook violently. Another chain snapped. Then another. Then another. The gate lurched forward several feet. A massive shadow moved behind it. For the first time, Daniel saw part of the source. Only a fragment. A shape larger than a building. Constantly changing. Faces emerged across its surface. Thousands of faces. Human faces. Appearing and disappearing endlessly. The sight nearly stopped his heart. The thing behind the gate wasn't a creature. It was every creature it had ever copied, combined into one impossible existence. The emergency console flickered to life. A single option appeared on the screen. Final containment authorized by Eleanor Graves. Daniel stared at the display. One command remained available. It would destroy the chamber, destroy the gate, destroy the entire mountain. The system required confirmation. His finger hovered above the button. The hollow reacted immediately. The whispers became screams. The source understood what he intended. The mountain shook harder than ever. Stone collapsed from above. The gate bent inward. A massive crack spread across its center. Daniel looked toward the echoes. They stood silently in the darkness, watching, waiting. The young woman stepped forward. The same echo who remembered her family. She nodded slowly. No words, no pleading, just acceptance. Daniel finally understood. If the source escaped, neither humans nor echoes would survive. Everything would become part of the hollow. Everything. He pressed the button. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then warning sirens erupted across the chamber. Red emergency lights flashed everywhere. Deep inside the mountain, explosive charges activated. The cavern trembled violently. The source roared. Not with anger, not with hatred, with confusion, as if it still could not understand what was happening. The first explosion detonated. The entire cavern shook. Then another, and another. Huge cracks spread across the walls. Stone pillars collapsed. The ceiling began falling apart. Daniel ran. The echoes ran with him, human and imitation alike, racing toward the tunnels. Behind them, the hollow below died. Or at least Daniel hoped it did. The mountain collapsed section by section. Entire tunnels vanished beneath millions of tons of rock. Explosions continued for nearly 10 minutes. Then, silence. Complete silence. Hours later, Daniel emerged from the mine entrance. The sun was rising. Ashen Hollow stretched silently before him. One final tremor rolled beneath the ground, then stopped. The nightmare was over. Or so it seemed. 3 days later, rescue teams arrived. Most refused to believe Daniel's story. Government officials collected evidence. The remaining tunnels were sealed permanently. Reports were classified. The official explanation blamed unstable geology. Just as before, history repeated itself. Ashen Hollow was forgotten again. Months passed. Daniel eventually returned home. He published what he could. Few people believed him. Most dismissed the story as fiction. Life slowly moved forward. Then one evening a package arrived. No return address. No note. Only a digital recorder. Daniel stared at it for a long time. Finally, he pressed play. Static filled the room. The same static he remembered from the beginning. For several seconds, there was nothing else. Then a familiar voice emerged. Eleanor Graves. Soft, distant, impossible. You stopped it. The signal crackled. Daniel listened carefully. Eleanor continued. For now. A cold sensation moved through him. The recording began breaking apart. Static overwhelmed the message. Then Eleanor spoke one final sentence. The last words anyone would ever hear from Ashen Hollow. It learned how to leave. The recorder went silent. Daniel sat frozen. Then something happened. A faint sound emerged from the speaker. Barely audible. Almost hidden beneath the static. Whispering. Hundreds of voices. Thousands. And among them was one voice Daniel recognized immediately. His own.